sort of half-closed eyes, rest upon the appearance of the earth in the kasina until the meditator can get a mental picture of the earth kasina, a very clear mental picture, and then he can stop focusing upon the outer kasina and just focus upon the mental idea of earth, earth, earth. Generally, one will have to go through a period of alternating with closed eyes and open eyes until one can get a very clear, distinct mental perception of earth. And then one just focuses upon the mental perception, and then as the faculties mature, then the mind becomes absorbed into that mental image of earth, and then gradually samadhi arises. Here the Buddha is not specifying the actual creation of the kasina, but maybe the meditator will go to an area where the ground is smooth and of a uniform color, without, stones, rocks, fallen leaves, patches of grass, because that would break up the uniformity. Okay, so the Buddha uses a simile to illustrate how that perception of earth has to be obtained. He says, just as a bull's hide becomes free from folds when fully stretched with 100 pegs. So this would have been a simile that would have been clear to the people of that particular time. Here, probably we don't see leather workers working, so we don't have a clear idea of this. But if you think of a rubber, or maybe think of a tent. What is that kind of rubber that they stretch out on the ground? A tarp, that's it, yeah. A rubber tarp, which when you take the sheet of rubber, it's all folded up and creased, but you spread it on the ground, and then if you use pegs to stretch it out, all of the folds and creases in the rubber vanish, and you just have a smooth rubber surface. Okay, so in this way, the Buddha says, the monk not attending to any of the ridges and hollows of this earth, to the rivers and ravines, the tracks of stumps and thorns, the mountains and uneven places, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind then enters into that perception of earth and acquires serenity, steadiness, and resolution. Okay, so now, presumably, the way I would understand this, the meditator is now able to gain samadhi, even jhana, on the basis of focusing on the earth, perhaps even probably going through the 4 jhanas. Okay, the text continues, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of people, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forests, those are not present here. Those are not present here. So earlier, the perception of forest was considered subtle, and the perception of the village and of people was gross or coarse. And so he used the perception of forest to overcome the disturbances based on the perception of people. But now, at this point, even the perception of forest is considered gross or a bit disturbing. And so he has to overcome the perception of forest, and he does this by focusing upon the perception of earth. So whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, that is the singleness or uniformity dependent on the perception of earth. So now he's going to understand this in terms of emptiness. So he understands this field of perception is empty of the perception of people. This field of perception is empty of the perception of forest. There is present only this non-emptiness, only this of which it is not empty, namely the singleness or the uniformity dependent on the perception of earth. Thus, he regards it as empty of what is not there. What is not there? Yeah, perception of... Wait, this is the perception of earth. Right. So what's absent is perception of people and perception of forest. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. So what is present there? Yeah, not earth, but perception of earth. Of course, the earth is present as the object, but since this is a process of subjective refinement, the focus is not on the external object, but on the perception of that object. So what is present is the perception of earth. So the perception of earth is initially subtle compared to the perception of forest. But now it's said that the perception of earth is even some degree, presents some degree of disturbance that's present there. Okay, so then the Buddha says, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. And as I said, in my interpretation, when the Buddha is speaking about the perception of earth, you could see this from the next section, where the Buddha jumps to the perception of the base of infinite space, which is the first of the four formless meditative attainments. So that seems to imply that the monk, the meditating monk, has achieved, in the previous section, has achieved the four jhanas. And those would be four jhanas based on the perception of earth. Four jhanas with the earth as the object of the jhanic experience. Okay, so now, maybe I should ask at this point, whether there's any questions. It's a pretty difficult sutta, or at least experientially it's difficult. Any questions? Yes, please. Wait, take the microphone so it gets recorded.
Thank you. Is this something that we could expect to realize in a certain amount of time? I know that's a difficult question, but when I've asked other people about jhanic meditation and formless meditation, some people say it's just so difficult to even realize as a layperson, and other people say it is possible depending upon your faculties. And I wonder what you feel about that.
It all depends on the person's faculties. They're not the easy attainments, but some people have mature faculties, probably, I would say, from practice in previous lives, or just through very diligent effort over a long period of time in this life alone. And so they're able to achieve this. And what I found interestingly, even though it's said that, the monk's life is supposed to be like the ideal condition for achieving the jhanas, But I've heard of lay people, lay practitioners, who achieve the jhanas, while most monks don't, don't achieve them. So it depends very much on the personal aptitude, previous effort in earlier lives that a person will have a disposition towards that, sort of the imprints, and very diligent effort. But if one is intent on the jhanic attainments, one shouldn't, in America we're used to, 6 months I will get you to be turned from a 98-pound weakling into a strong man, or for a diet plan, 6 weeks you can go from 300 pounds to 180 pounds, or, well, some, quote, Buddhist teachers teach weekend enlightenment courses. And I haven't seen it in a long time, but I used to see on the column that you get on on Gmail, somebody advertising, I'll have you meditating like a Zen master in 6 weeks. So we're used to getting everything quickly, but practicing the Dharma, it's a gradual process. And if one practices rightly with dedication, one makes gradual progress. Any other questions? Okay, Jaren?
Bhante, the states of so-called emptiness they're talking over here is only an experience, right, Bhante? In other words, what I mean is, if an ordinary being, they have an experience of emptiness.
Yeah.
It can be only a moment or two.
Yeah.
But it is not you don't get it once and you don't, it's not forever, right, those experiences?
Of course, there are many different understandings of emptiness. I'll just try to stick to what is being explained here. This is the way in which the monk or the meditator is examining his experience, using the idea of emptiness as a kind of filter or template for examining the experience. And so one is examining the experience to see what is that experience is empty of, and to see what is still present there as a kind of incentive for bringing the meditative development to a still higher or deeper level. And so one sees that it's empty of certain things means that those things are absent in the experience. What is still present there is said to be a degree of disturbance, darita matta. And so since one is aiming to reach deeper stages of tranquilization, then one has to progress to the next level in order to eliminate that factor that is causing that degree of disturbance. Yeah, so that's the way emptiness is being explained here. So it's not so much a realization in the sense of some kind of enlightenment experience, but it's more a seeing and examining the meditative state in terms of what has been eliminated in that state and what is still present there and causing some degree of disturbance. David, please take the microphone.
Okay, this sounds like the removal of layers of perception.
Yeah, that's a very
right?
good analogy to use. It's like sort of peeling off.
Peeling things off, like in I don't know, you probably don't know Photoshop. It's a photo editing process, but what you can do is remove layers of the image until there's nothing left, just a gray field. So I assume it's something similar to that.
Yeah, in fact, I remember even with the one that I've used, Picasa, when you want to sort of doctor up the image, if you start off with a black and white photo, but nowadays all the photos are colored, but you could do things like change the lighting, change the shading, strengthen the colors, mellow the colors, and then you get one image, but then you decide, oh, I like the original better. So then you click cancel the mellowing of the image, cancel the brightening of the colors, cancel the intensification of the shading, cancel the change of the lighting, and then you get the original image. Nelia?
What I see here is that we are single-pointedly focused on an object. In this particular case, it's the earth.
Yeah.
Can it be any object that you feel you can focus on even clearer than that?
I would say so, definitely so. Yeah, it's just that the earth is chosen here. I mean, the Buddha had to choose some object.
Right.
And probably, of course, they're sitting in this building and they see the forest. And so instead of focusing upon the forest, instead of focusing upon all the trees in the forest, which the trees have variety,
Right, yeah.
so focusing upon the earth, particularly the way the
As
Buddha
being
explains it, a uniform
Like this.
stretch, a uniform track of the earth, then you get this greater uniformity.
So once that disturbance or the perception of the earth is gone, would you say that's the point where you get to the jhanas?
No, I'd say that the meditator is developing the jhanas based on the perception of the earth. So the earth is now the object of the jhanas. So this is like, especially in the system of the Visuddhimagga, the earth kasina can be the object of the 4 jhanas. If one doesn't want the earth, actually something like the surface of water could be used as an object, especially on a windless day, so that the water is very smooth without
The glass.
waves. Or one could use, I mentioned the other kasinas, would be like the blue kasina, red kasina, just a circular disc of a uniform, absolutely uniform color. Okay, let us continue. Okay, so now we're going to go beyond the perception of earth. And we'll see, this is why I think the perception of earth is intended implicitly to include the 4 jhanas, the 4 meditative absorptions. Because the Buddha continues that the monk, now not attending to the perception of forest, not attending to the perception of earth, attends to the singleness or uniformity dependent on the base of infinite space, or the base of the infinity of space. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite space and acquires serenity, steadiness, and resolution. Okay, now the way this is done, according to the way it's explained in the commentaries, suppose when the meditator has achieved the jhana based on the perception of earth, using the earth kasina. And so first one has to master that meditation in various ways. It's not that you just attain it for a few minutes and then one is ready to go on to the next stage. But one has to enter into it repeatedly so that one could enter into it whenever one wants to without any struggle. One has to get very familiar with that perception. Okay, and so one has the earth object. It's no longer a visible patch of earth, but it's the mentally visualized earth as the object of the meditation. And now to go to the base of infinite space, what one has to do is to start extending or expanding the circle of earth that one is perceiving in one's meditation, the sphere of earth. One expands it more and more widely until the whole field of perception is covered with the perception of earth, or till the manifestation of earth covers the whole field of perception. So that in front of one, to the sides, above one, and even seemingly behind one, everything is covered with earth, the uniform color of the earth. Then one has to gradually make the determination to remove the appearance of earth. And then as one's effort gains momentum, at a certain point, the field of earth perception drops away, and what remains when the earth is removed is just the space that the perception of earth had been occupying. And since the perception of earth has been expanded infinitely, the space that remains when the idea of earth is removed is infinite space. And so that marks the attainment of the first formless or non-material meditative attainment. Okay, so now he understands whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. So now, he's not even mentioning the village or people anymore, because those are sort of been left behind long ago. So now even the perception of forest and the perception of earth, those have vanished. But there is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. Okay, now he applies the idea of emptiness to this, and he understands the field of perception is empty of the perception of forest. This field of perception is empty of the perception of earth. There is present only this non-emptiness, this which is not empty, namely the singleness or uniformity dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. Okay, so he regards it as empty of what is not there. What is empty? What is not there? Perception of and forest. Perception of forest, perception of earth, and what remains there? Right, the perception of the base of infinite space. Okay, so this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into emptiness. Okay, I'm going to just jump over the next sections. So the next, just taking the main theme, the next section applies this to attaining the base of infinite consciousness. Then we go to the base of nothingness. Then section 9 to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, then we come to section 10. And here we have a new item introduced, something which is not found so often in the suttas. Okay, so following the text, again, Ananda, the monk, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness, uniformity, dependent on the signless concentration of mind. His mind enters into that signless concentration and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution upon that. And what is called the signless concentration of mind in Pali, this is the animitta ceto samadhi. And many different interpretations have been given to this expression in many different commentaries and different schools of Buddhism. But the way it's understood, or the way it's explained in the Pali commentaries, is that this is the deep concentration that arises not through the process of samatha meditation, but through the process of vipassana, insight meditation. Often we think of samadhi and vipassana as somewhat opposed to each other, but actually, as the meditator is developing insight, the mind is becoming progressively more concentrated, more focused upon the object, though the object of insight meditation is always changing. And it's said that when the mind develops deep meditative concentration on the characteristic of impermanence, then that samadhi is called the signless or markless concentration of mind. And it's called the signless meditation because one is contemplating phenomena from which the mark or sign of stability, lastingness, or permanence has been stripped away. And so one is seeing continuously, with unbroken attention, the constant arising and passing away of phenomena. And so it's said that his mind enters into that signless concentration of mind, and then whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness, those are not present. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, those are not present here. What is present is only this amount of disturbance, namely that connected with the 6 sense bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life, by the life faculty. Okay, so then he understands that the field of perception is void of the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He understands that what is present are the 6 bases dependent on the body, the 6 sense bases: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the sense of touch, the mind faculty, and conditioned by life. Okay, now the next stage, okay, repeats the same, it starts off repeating the same sentences. Okay, so the monk, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless concentration of mind. He then enters into that signless concentration, acquires serenity, steadiness, and resolution. Okay, now he's going to contemplate that meditative state itself with insight. And he sees that this signless concentration of mind itself is conditioned and a product of volition. In other words, there's a tendency amongst meditators to grasp upon very deep meditative experiences as being some kind of disclosure of the absolute self, the unconditioned self, or the absolute reality. But now the meditator here turns the beam of awareness. He's been contemplating the impermanence of all other phenomena, and so his mind has become deeply absorbed in this contemplation, this concentrated contemplation of impermanence of all phenomena. But now he turns the beam of awareness back upon that concentration itself and understands that this signless concentration itself arises through conditions, particularly all of the effort that is invested in obtaining that concentration of mind. And so it's a product of volition. The text says it's something abhisankaritam, abhisanchetayitang. It's something abhisankatang, abhisanchetayitang. Something produced by conditions, by having undertaken all of the preparations, having gone through all the initial stages, having made the effort, the endeavor to attain it. And then one realizes that whatever is conditioned and produced by volition is impermanent, subject to cessation. So even that signless concentration of mind, because it's created by conditions, when those conditions are removed, that signless concentration comes to an end. And so one is getting now a radical insight into impermanence, that even this concentration of mind is something produced through the chain, through a network or web of conditions. And because it's produced by conditions, when those conditions are removed, then that signless concentration of mind comes to an end. So it's subject to cessation. And then when he knows and sees thus, his mind is liberated from the taint of sensual desire. That's from the asava, the deep underlying defilement of sensual craving, liberated from the taint of craving for continued existence, liberated from the taint, the asava of ignorance. And then he understands birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. So this marks the attainment of arahatship, through contemplating the conditioned and impermanent nature of the signless concentration of mind. At this point, now I'll ask whether there's any questions. As I said, this goes into very deep territory, so don't be.
I'm still stuck with this word descent.
let us say, maybe it's using the image of going towards deeper and deeper states. Yeah. I'm using higher. Okay, so the problem is, so he says that he has difficulty understanding the use of the word descent. These are just sort of metaphorical words. If we speak about going into deeper and deeper states, then we say that one is descending into emptiness. One could change the metaphor and say one is ascending to higher and higher states. One can say that one is moving to higher and higher states, then one would use the metaphor of ascending rather than descending. If we want to use a neutral term, we could say entering into deeper states or entering into higher states. Progressing, yeah. Richard?
Is the word base used in the beginning of the phrase for each of the 4 formless meditations? Because the base was originally the kasina in the first 4 meditative states, and each of the subsequent ones are replacing the kasina with something else, and so that's why their bases is always, the base of infinite space, the base of neither perception and non-perception?
The sense could be in the sense that they are objects for meditation. In fact, technically, the word kasina is sort of the commonly used shorthand, but the more sort of fuller expression is actually kasinayatana. And the word ayatana that's joined to kasina is the same word that's used in relation to, say, the base of infinite space is akasananchayatana, infinite consciousness, vinyananchayatana. So you see, it's the same, the second part of the compound is the same word.
Okay.
So probably in the sense of something that serves as the object of support for the meditative mind.
Because what the kasina is conceptualized as being initially is earth, right? And then each of the others is replacing it, right? And so that's why that's the concept, right?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Overall, it strikes me that what's really being eliminated is attachment, is desire, right? Why is there the assumption that the elimination of desire, or attachment, there's a desire for continued being and so on, and all of that, is equivalent to being free of rebirth or no longer coming back and all that? Where does that assumption come from?
Can you bring that question up again when we have the discussion period after the lunch break? Because that's sort of like a big question. I just want to, we just have like 5 minutes and I want to finish the sutta. Okay, so he says, now we're progressing to paragraph 12. So he says, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint, or actually I prefer now asava, influx of sensual desire, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the asava of craving for existence, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the asava of ignorance, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, that connected with the 6 sense bases, dependent on the body, and conditioned by life. So I think at this point, this is referring to what is called the nibbana element with a residue remaining. The residue is the complex of bodily and mental experience, or the complex of body and mind, the 5 aggregates that the Arahat still maintains through the course of his life. And so that is some degree of disturbance, since through the 6 sense faculties, one is still subject to the disturbance, sort of the natural disturbances of pleasant sensations, painful sensations, hunger, thirst, injury, physical illness, and so forth. And so that remains, but he understands that this field of perception is void of the 3 asavas of sensual craving, craving for existence, and craving and ignorance. And there is present only this which is not empty, that connected with the 6 sense bases, dependent on this body, and conditioned by life. And so he regards it as empty of what is not there, but as to what remains, he understands this is present. And then the Buddha concludes the main portion of the exposition. He says, this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into emptiness, supreme and unsurpassed. I think he uses the expressions. Let's see if I have the Pali. Yep, Parama Anuttara. And so the commentary then explains that this is referring to what's called the Arahat's fruition attainment of emptiness. This is a special meditative attainment into which the Buddhas and the Arahats can enter while alive. They enter into a samadhi that takes nibbana as its object of experience. And one could focus upon nibbana in different ways. So the 3 ways in which one could enter absorption into nibbana are as the signless, the desireless, and as emptiness. So in this case, he's referring to the entry into the fruition meditation of arhatship, which focuses upon nibbana in the aspect of emptiness. And then the Buddha, in a way, in a sense, highlighting the significance of this discourse, he says that whatever ascetics and Brahmins in the past entered upon and dwelt in pure, supreme, unsurpassed emptiness, all entered and dwelt in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed emptiness. And so for all those ascetics and Brahmins in the future, and whatever ascetics and Brahmins at present enter and dwell in pure, supreme, unsurpassed emptiness, all enter and dwell in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed emptiness. And then since Ananda is still in training, the Buddha says you should train thus. We will enter upon and dwell in pure, supreme, unsurpassed emptiness. Okay, and that takes us to the end of the sutta. I won't take questions now, but please do come back after the lunch break. We'll start at 12:30, and so we could take some questions that time. And we'll give priority to Richard, since he had a question for this session. Okay, and we'll have a class again next week. Next week we come into the greater discourse on emptiness. Don't throw your eyes up to the ceiling. So it's called greater discourse. Greater actually means longer. They're called chula and maha on the basis of length. Not necessarily that one is more boring than the other, or more difficult than the other. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. May all the devas, nagas, bhutas enter upon this pure, supreme, unsurpassed